He said my business would embarrass him. It made $2 million and I left. That's what he told me. Those exact words. Your little business idea would just embarrass me. My name is Linda. I'm 64 years old, and I spent most of my life making sure other people felt comfortable, especially him. For decades, I was the quiet wife who stood behind the scenes. I put my own dreams aside so he could chase his. I raised our kids, I supported his career, I smiled when I wanted to cry, and I stayed silent when I wanted to scream. One day, I told him I had an idea. Something simple. A little business from home. Nothing huge. Just mine. He didn't get angry. He didn't even argue. He just looked at me and said I'd embarrass him. In that moment, something in me hardened. Not out of hate. Out of clarity. I knew I couldn't count on him to believe in me. So I stopped trying. What started at my kitchen table became a business worth over $2 million. I built it with my hands, my heart, and no permission from anyone. And when I left, I didn't shout. I didn't slam a door. I packed my things and walked out with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's worth. I want to tell you how it all happened. From the first seed of the idea to the moment I chose myself. But first, tell me something. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or state. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. And if stories like this speak to you, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because I share real, emotional stories here every single day. Let's begin. This is how everything changed. I was 29 when I married Richard. Back then, I thought I had won the lottery. He was smart, confident, well-dressed, and everyone seemed to respect him. He made people laugh at dinner parties and spoke like a man who always knew what to do next. I loved how safe he made me feel. What I didn't notice, or didn't want to, was how small I had to become to keep that feeling. He never told me not to dream. He just made sure I knew which dreams were appropriate. He liked me soft-spoken. He liked the house tidy. He liked dinner hot and served right as he walked in. And for years, I convinced myself that was love. That his approval meant I was doing something right. I didn't complain. I told myself it was normal. I raised our kids while he climbed the corporate ladder. He earned the applause. I earned the silence. When I did speak up, it was about grocery lists or school events. My voice was safe that way. Predictable. Non-threatening. But deep down, I always carried a quiet restlessness. I loved to sew. Not just clothes, but anything with fabric. I used to make little things for friends and neighbors. Placemats, decorative pillows, hand-stitched kitchen towels. They'd tell me, "You should sell these." I'd laugh and wave it off. I knew what Richard would say. Still, after our youngest moved out, the silence in the house grew louder. I spent more time alone. I started sewing again, this time for myself. I opened a small social media page and posted a few photos. No name, no face, just the work. To my surprise, people responded. Orders started to trickle in. $10 here, $20 there. Just enough to feel like I existed again. One evening, I was packaging 3 little kitchen towel sets at the dining table. Richard walked in and raised an eyebrow. "What's all this?" I smiled and said, "A few people online ordered some things I made." He laughed. Not a big laugh. A short one. The kind that stings because it's not loud enough to seem cruel, but just enough to make you feel ridiculous. He sat down, looked at the towels, and said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but it's kind of embarrassing." I stopped folding. He kept talking like he was being helpful. I mean, what if people from my job see this? You posting little homemaker projects on the internet? You don't want to come off desperate. That word hit harder than I expected. Desperate. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't let it show. I smiled and said I'd clean everything up before dinner. He patted my hand, stood, and went to shower. And I stood there, still holding the last towel, trying to remember when exactly I became someone who needed to hide. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things I had given up. Not just career or money, but the simple act of wanting something. I had handed over the steering wheel of my life one silent year at a time. But something was different now. I had made $58 that week. Not much. But they were mine. Earned with my hands, my creativity, and no one's permission. And the orders kept coming. I didn't tell Richard. Not anymore. Instead, I started sewing earlier in the morning, while he was still asleep. I packaged orders in the laundry room. I shipped them while doing grocery runs. I began tracking everything in a notebook. What people liked, what colors sold more, what designs made people come back. And for the first time in decades, I felt awake. The next week, I sold 12 sets. Then 23. I started waking up before the sun, not out of obligation, but because I couldn't wait to start creating. My sewing machine became my companion. The hum of the motor felt like a heartbeat. Every piece I made had my fingerprints, my time, my love stitched into it. I found joy in the little things, choosing fabrics, wrapping each order in brown paper, handwriting thank you notes. My kitchen counter became my workspace. The dining table was my shipping station. I bought my own labels. I made my own logo. Quietly, carefully, I was building something real. Richard noticed, of course. He wasn't blind. But he chose to treat it like a hobby I'd get over. He never asked how it was going. Never asked how many orders I had. When packages started arriving with bulk fabric and supplies, he frowned but didn't say much. Sometimes he made a joke about our house turning into a craft barn. Other times, he'd leave the room when I was busy, as if pretending none of it was happening. I let him pretend. I had spent decades shrinking myself to keep the peace. I wasn't interested in fighting. I was interested in building. I opened a small shop online. Nothing fancy. Just a clean page, product photos, and a quiet confidence. Sales trickled in from strangers now, not just neighbors or friends. The numbers were small, but steady. 50 orders. Then 70. Then one day, a woman from Vermont ordered 10 identical towel sets for wedding gifts. That was the first time I cried. Not because of the money, but because a stranger believed in something I made. I didn't tell Richard about that order either. He came home that night and asked what was for dinner. I had forgotten. I was so busy sewing and fulfilling that big order, the afternoon slipped away. I apologized and offered to order something in. He looked disappointed. Then said, I guess this little business is more important than feeding your husband now. I didn't answer. I just nodded, went to the kitchen, and started cooking while my sewing machine still ran in the background. He didn't like that sound. I could tell. But I loved it. It was the sound of my own hands working towards something that had nothing to do with him. I started tracking my income. It wasn't massive at first, but it grew. I reached my first $1,000 month. Then $2,400. When I crossed $5,000, I remember sitting in the car outside the post office, just holding the receipt, shaking. I wasn't used to that feeling. Accomplishment. Independence. Pride. And no one clapped for me. No one hugged me. No one said they were proud. But I was. I was proud of myself in a way I hadn't felt in decades. Maybe ever. I opened a business account at the bank. The woman helping me smiled when I told her the name of the business, a name Richard didn't even know. She said it was charming. I thanked her and held back tears. I was no longer invisible. At home, things stayed quiet. The more the business grew, the more Richard pulled away. He didn't ask questions, and I stopped offering answers. We moved around each other like strangers. He still expected his shirts ironed and his dinner hot, and for a while, I kept doing those things. But the more I built my world, the less energy I had for maintaining his. I stopped apologizing when I was too tired to make dinner. I stopped pretending I was fulfilled by serving someone who never saw me. I started standing a little taller, smiling to myself, sleeping better. And one night, while sewing a batch of orders late, I realized something that stopped me cold. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being alone. Not of failing. Not even of what he might say if he knew how much money I was making. Because I knew now, I had done this. All of it. With no help, no applause, and no permission. I didn't need his approval anymore. I wasn't building this for him. I was building it to finally meet the woman I had been waiting to become. It was a Saturday morning when I saw the number. I had just finished my quarterly reports. Yes, I had quarterly reports now. Spreadsheets, expenses, profit margins. My shop had passed $50,000 in total revenue. I had done it all from my home, with one machine, my own 2 hands, and a vision I never dared to speak out loud. I looked at the screen for a long time. Then I took a screenshot. And for the first time, I printed it. I pinned it to the corkboard in my sewing corner. It wasn't about the number. It was about proving to myself that it was real. That I wasn't making it up. That I wasn't silly or naive or desperate. I was a businesswoman. And my work had value. Later that day, Richard came into the kitchen while I was cutting fabric. He noticed the paper on the board. "What's that?" he asked, already half dismissive. I looked at him. I could have hidden it. I could have said it was nothing. But I didn't. "It's my revenue," I said. 50,000. So far. He paused. His expression didn't change much. But I saw it in his eyes. Something shifted. The hobby was no longer harmless. The joke had turned into numbers on paper. And those numbers were bigger than he expected. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate me. He walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and said, "That's a lot of towels." And that was it. No pride. No warmth. Just quiet resistance. That night, he didn't speak to me at all. And the next morning, he left early for the gym and came back late without explanation. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. But something inside me clicked again. A deeper kind of knowing. This wasn't about towels. It was about power. About identity. About a woman no longer willing to be small. Weeks passed. Orders kept growing. I hired a young woman part-time to help with packaging and customer emails. Her name was Elena. Bright eyes, soft voice, full of ideas. She reminded me of who I might have been if someone had told me at 22 that my voice mattered. One day, Elena suggested we do a short video about my work. Just a simple clip to post online and show my process. I hesitated. I had always stayed behind the camera. My hands, my work, but never my face. She said gently, "People love to see who's behind the brand. Especially someone like you." I asked what she meant. She smiled and said, "A woman doing this at your age? That's powerful." I didn't correct her. I didn't shrink. I just nodded. We filmed the video. I wore my favorite blue sweater. My silver hair was pulled back. I didn't try to look younger. I just wanted to look like myself. We posted the clip on a Friday morning. By Sunday night, it had over 300,000 views. Orders doubled. Then tripled. I had to upgrade my workspace. I turned the guest room into a studio. I bought a second machine. I stopped using the dining table. And Richard noticed. Not just the fabric and the boxes. He noticed me. He started coming home earlier. Asking more questions. "Do you even have time to cook anymore?" I told him there was food in the fridge. He didn't like that answer. He sat across from me one evening and said, "I didn't sign up for this." I looked at him. Calm. Steady. "You signed up for a woman who disappears," I said. "And I'm not her anymore." He looked away. The silence between us wasn't cold. It was empty. I had filled myself with purpose. And there was no more space for pretending. That night, I lay in bed and thought about all the ways I used to twist myself into shapes to be loved. All the meals cooked with resentment. All the smiles forced through fatigue. All the times I said yes when I wanted to say no. And I thought, maybe I could stay. Maybe I could keep building my business and let him deal with the change. But then I realized something even deeper. I didn't want to be tolerated. I wanted to be seen. And that was something he could never give me. The morning the news article came out, I was still in my robe, sipping tea by the window. Elena had pitched the story to a small local magazine that covered women-owned businesses. We didn't expect much. Just a short piece, a bit of visibility. But the journalist who came to interview me was different. She sat at my table, listened closely, took real notes. She wasn't just writing about a brand. She was writing about me. The headline hit bigger than we thought. Silver thread: how a 64-year-old grandmother built a $500,000 business from her kitchen table. Within hours, the article was shared across multiple platforms. My email exploded. Wholesale inquiries, podcast requests, even a television segment offer. Women from all over the country were writing to me. Some older, some younger, all of them saying the same thing. You give me hope. You remind me it's not too late. I cried in the laundry room so no one would see me. Richard saw the article, of course. It was unavoidable. It appeared on his news feed. A coworker even brought it up during a staff meeting, half joking. Did you see this sewing lady who made $500,000 from her kitchen? Unreal. Richard didn't answer. He changed the subject. When he came home that night, he said nothing at first. I was unpacking fabric from a new supplier. The room smelled like fresh cotton and eucalyptus. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, then finally spoke. So you're a celebrity now? I smiled without looking up. No. I'm a business owner. He didn't like that answer either. He walked to the fridge, poured himself a drink, and muttered something about the house looking like a warehouse. It didn't matter. The house looked like me now. The walls had warmth. There was color in every room. My laughter returned, not loud but steady. Even the silence was different. It no longer held tension. It held space. I hosted my first workshop the following weekend. 10 women came. Some with grey hair, some with walking sticks, one in her 70s who said she hadn't sewn since 1982. We sat in a circle, surrounded by thread, scissors, and stories. We shared more than techniques. We shared pieces of ourselves that had been silenced for too long. At the end of the day, one woman held my hands and said, "You reminded me that I'm still here." That night, I told Richard I'd be gone most Saturdays from now on, hosting more workshops. He stared at me like I was speaking another language. He asked, "What am I supposed to do while you're out playing dress-up with fabric?" I answered calmly, "You'll figure it out." I did. His silence this time wasn't cold. It was defensive. His armor was cracking, and he didn't know how to live in a house where he was no longer the center. 2 weeks later, my business passed $1 million in lifetime revenue. I celebrated with tea and carrot cake. Elena brought flowers. We didn't scream or dance. We just sat in the studio, smiling like women who knew what it meant to build something from nothing. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday. A company Richard worked with had invited him to a formal dinner. He asked me to go. I said yes. I wore a dark blue dress that fit me just right. No shapewear. No heavy makeup. My hair was in a soft twist, and I wore my silver with pride. I walked beside him, not behind. Not beneath. Beside. At the event, people came up to him and said, "So you're the husband of that sewing lady?" Some laughed. Some meant it kindly. Others admired me openly. One woman said, "You're Linda, right? I follow your business. You're amazing." Richard laughed it off, but I saw it. The tightness in his jaw. The forced smile. In the car, he was quiet. When we got home, he finally said it. I can't believe you let them talk to me like that. Like I'm your plus one. I looked at him, steady. I didn't let them do anything. They see me now. Maybe it's time you did too. He raised his voice then. For the first time in years. This whole thing is ridiculous. You're embarrassing me. There it was again. That word. Embarrassing. Only this time, it didn't land. I stood in the center of our living room, surrounded by things I built with my own hands. And I realized I wasn't the one who should feel embarrassed. He was ashamed because I had done something he never thought I could. And I did it without him. That night, I packed a small bag and went to stay at my sister's. I didn't tell him how long I'd be gone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I left the house as calm as I had ever been, because I finally understood something vital. Success is not about money. It's about permission. And I had finally stopped waiting for his. The first night at my sister's house, I barely slept. Not because I was scared or sad. Because it was quiet in a different way. No sewing machine. No background tension. No passive sighs or cold silences. Just a stillness that let me breathe for the first time in years. My sister, Joan, didn't ask many questions. She had seen it all for years. She once told me that being married to someone like Richard was like living in a museum. Everything looked nice, but nothing was allowed to be touched. At the time, I had defended him. Now I understood what she meant. The second morning, I sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug. She poured coffee, sat across from me, and said something that caught me off guard. You're not leaving him for the business. You're leaving because you finally see yourself. I didn't respond right away. But she was right. The money was a symbol. The real shift had happened months earlier, when I realized I was no longer afraid of being alone. I was afraid of staying unseen. Over the next few weeks, I kept working. Orders continued. Interviews came in. A podcast in Chicago wanted to feature my story. A speaking invitation arrived from a women's conference. My inbox became a space filled with opportunity instead of silence. But still, Richard didn't call. Not once. No questions. No apologies. No how are yous. He didn't come looking. And in a strange way, that was the answer I didn't know I needed. One afternoon, I returned to the house while he was at work. I moved through the rooms with a calm purpose. I didn't take everything. I took what was mine. My sewing machines. My notebooks. My fabrics. My certificates. A few photographs I had kept hidden in drawers. I left behind the wedding china and the designer curtains he loved so much. I left behind the version of me that clung to permission. On the fridge, I left a note. I wrote, I am not ashamed of what I built, but I am done building it in a house where I feel like a guest. I signed it with my full name. Not, your wife. Not, Linda. Just me. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. Joan's guest room was small. The mattress was a little firm. The walls were pale yellow. But it held me like a safe place, like a blank page. I started thinking about buying my own space. Nothing big. Just mine. A home where every room would reflect who I had become. No more walking on eggshells. No more dimming my light. A space filled with the scent of fabric, the sound of creativity, and the quiet strength of knowing I had earned every inch. Weeks passed. Richard finally called. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just said, "So you're really not coming back?" I paused before answering. "No," I said. "I'm not." There was silence. Then he asked the question I knew he'd been holding in. "So, is this about the business?" I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply and said, "No, it's about me." He laughed, the same dry laugh he used when he didn't want to show his feelings. "You've changed," he said. "I have," I replied. And then I hung up. Not out of anger. Out of completion. There was nothing more to explain. I wasn't interested in justifying my joy. I had already done that for 35 years. This was not a rebellion. It was a return. A return to the woman I had buried under polite silence and well-ironed shirts. 3 months later, I signed the lease on a small brick storefront with a loft upstairs. The bottom became my studio and shop. The top, my new home. It smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I opened my doors on a Sunday. Over 50 women came. They brought stories, hugs, laughter, and tears. Some bought towels. Some just came to say thank you. One brought a framed quote that read, "She remembered who she was, and the game changed." I hung it in the front window. Not for customers. For me. Every morning, I see it when I unlock the door. And every morning, I whisper to myself, I was never an embarrassment. I was a late bloomer. And now, I'm in full bloom. The storefront sat on a quiet corner with big windows and old wood floors. It had character. It had light. It had space to breathe. I painted the walls in soft green, hung long linen curtains, and filled the shelves with everything I had once made in secret. Only now, nothing was hidden. My name was on the sign above the door. And every part of that space carried my touch. I named the shop Still Threaded. Not just because of fabric or sewing. Because even after everything, I was still here. Still standing. Still me. Threaded together by every experience, every silence, every broken promise that I turned into strength. Women started coming in not just to shop, but to talk. Some were regulars, others just passed through. They'd sit by the window while I worked, watching me stitch or organize fabric bundles. Many came with their own stories. One had just lost her husband. Another had finally divorced after 40 years. One woman, Marcia, said, "I've been invisible since I turned 50. But watching what you built, it made me want to paint again." That's when I knew this shop wasn't about products. It was a space for restoration. A quiet haven where women could remember who they were before they stopped being seen. I started hosting evening circles. We didn't always sew. Sometimes we just shared tea, cookies, and conversation. The rule was simple. No one had to explain their past. We were only allowed to talk about what we were building now. The studio became more than a business. It became a mirror. And the more I listened to their stories, the more I realized how many women had been carrying invisible weight for decades. Weight made of other people's expectations, disappointments, and ideas about what we should be. One night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the studio with the lights off. The street outside was quiet. I watched my own reflection in the front window. Silver hair, soft eyes, hands that had built something no one believed in. And I said aloud, "I'm proud of you." It was the first time I had ever said those words to myself. 1 week later, I received an email from a major publisher. They had seen one of my podcast interviews and wanted to talk about a potential book. A memoir. My story. At first, I hesitated. My instinct was still to keep things private, to protect the version of myself that had once been told to stay quiet. But then I thought about all the women who sat in my studio with tears in their eyes, saying, I thought I was the only one. So I said yes. The process was long. Emotional. I wrote in the mornings, between orders, sometimes late at night with a candle burning and the hum of the city outside my window. I wrote about the Linda who waited too long. The Linda who whispered her dreams into a pillow. The Linda who finally stood up and didn't sit back down. When the book was done, I held the first printed copy in my hands and wept. Not for the pain, but for the woman I had become on the other side of it. Richard never reached out again. Sometimes I wondered if he saw the shop, if he drove past it, if he ever opened the article that announced the book's release. But I no longer needed to know. I didn't need closure from him. I had created it myself. Joan came to my launch event. She stood in the back, eyes full of pride. She said, "You didn't just change your life. You lit a fire in other women." She was right. I started receiving letters from women in Nebraska, Michigan, even Alaska. Handwritten notes saying, "You gave me permission to dream again." Some had started their own shops. Others had simply told their husbands, for the first time, what they truly wanted. Every word was a reminder that healing doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Years ago, I would have said I was just a wife with a hobby. Now I knew better. I was a woman who stopped waiting for someone to believe in her. And when I stopped waiting, everything changed. The first time I stood on a stage to speak, I held the microphone with both hands because they were shaking. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had brought me to that moment. A room full of women sat before me, some smiling, some teary-eyed, some clutching notebooks ready to write something they didn't want to forget. I wasn't nervous about forgetting my story. I had lived every piece of it in silence for too long. I opened my talk the same way I opened my heart in my book. I spent most of my life being quiet. Now, I want to use my voice to remind you that it's never too late to become someone you're proud of. The room was still. Some women cried openly. One stood up halfway through the talk and whispered, "Thank you," before sitting back down. That single moment was worth more than all the orders I had ever shipped. After the event, I stood near the exit shaking hands, receiving hugs, listening to short, whispered confessions. I haven't dreamed in 30 years. I used to paint, but I gave it up when the kids came. I used to feel beautiful. I wish I were as brave as you. To each woman, I said the same thing. You are brave. You're here. And I meant it. The next week, I received a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was from Richard's sister. She had read the book and wanted to meet. At first, I hesitated. Old wounds are tricky. Even when healed, they leave you tender in places no one else can see. But I agreed. We met at a small cafe near my shop. She arrived with kind eyes and a tight smile. We hugged briefly. She held my hand across the table and said, "I'm sorry." We all saw it, but no one knew how to say it out loud. I nodded. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. She asked if Richard knew about the book. I told her I didn't know and that it didn't matter. I don't need him to read it, I said. I needed to write it. She asked if I would ever speak to him again. I said, maybe one day. If the conversation is about closure, not apology. When I left the cafe, I felt something loosen in my chest. A thread that had been pulled tight for too many years. Not resentment. Not grief. Just the soft unraveling of old silence. Back at the shop, Elena was helping a new client. The woman was in her 70s, with soft white hair and eyes full of hesitation. She said she hadn't touched a sewing machine in over 40 years. Elena gently guided her toward a beginner kit, and the woman smiled as if someone had given her permission to breathe again. I stood back and watched. This was the real business I had built. Not the products. Not the revenue. But the return of something so many women had lost. Confidence. Creativity. Ownership. That night, I updated the website with a new section called Second Beginnings. It featured stories of women who had started something new after 60. Gardening businesses. Quilting clubs. Online writing circles. I wanted the shop to be a home not just for fabric, but for possibility. Because women like us were never too old. We had simply been waiting for the right moment. And the moment was always now. The next morning, I opened the shop as usual. The light poured through the front windows. I turned on the kettle. Music played softly from the old radio by the counter. I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt even in my best moments before. Peace. Not the kind that comes from things being perfect, but the kind that comes from knowing you no longer need to prove your worth to anyone. I had found my home in the world. And it was stitched together from years of being underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. But I was never broken. Just unfolding. A letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was tucked between fabric samples and an invoice from a supplier. No return address. Just my name, written in a familiar, rigid hand. I stood for a long time before opening it. The shop was quiet. The kettle had just finished boiling. I poured the water, let the tea steep, and sat at the back table where I used to sketch out product ideas. Then I opened the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard. The letter was short. Only 1 page. No apologies. No explanations. Just a few words that landed heavier than I expected. You were right. I didn't see you. But now everyone else does. I hope that brings you peace. I read it twice. Then folded it and placed it inside a drawer without anger or sadness. He was right. I had been invisible to him. And yes, now others saw me. But that wasn't what brought me peace. What brought me peace was knowing I no longer needed to be seen by anyone to believe in myself. The world's applause was never going to fill what only self-respect could. That night, I walked to the little rooftop of my loft above the shop. The air was cool. The stars were clear. I sat with a blanket over my shoulders, a cup of tea in hand, and closed my eyes. This was the part of the story no one talks about. Not the rebuilding. Not the success. But the quiet after the storm, when you look around and realize you're still standing, softer maybe, but stronger than ever. I thought of the version of me that once asked for permission. She would have cried reading that letter. But the woman I had become felt only calm. No revenge. No regret. Just release. Later that week, Elena brought in a newspaper clipping. It was a national magazine, and they had included still threaded in a piece about women over 60 transforming the business world. My photo was right there, smiling, hands in my apron pockets, surrounded by color and cloth. I framed it. Not because I needed validation, but because I wanted a reminder. A reminder of how far I had come. How long I had waited. How much I had grown. One afternoon, a woman named Susan walked into the shop. She was quiet, hesitant, in her early 70s. She had read the article. She had just left her husband. She didn't know what came next. I made her tea. Sat her down. She asked me, "How did you know it was time to leave?" I answered simply, "When staying started to cost more than leaving." She nodded, eyes full of water but not yet tears. That day, I gave her a journal from the gift section. I told her to start writing the life she wanted, even if she didn't believe it yet. She hugged me on the way out. The kind of hug that says, "Thank you for going first." I thought of all the women who would come after me, who would walk through this little studio looking for something they couldn't quite name. Hope. Belief. Proof. And I thought, maybe that's why I stayed silent for so long. So that now, I could speak with the kind of voice only time and pain and healing can create. The older I get, the more I understand that freedom doesn't come with noise. It comes quietly, like sunlight through a window you forgot to open. It arrives in the moment you stop waiting for someone to choose you, and start choosing yourself. That's what I live now. Every morning I walk through the doors of Still Threaded. I feel the weight of the life I left behind melt into the past. Not with bitterness. Not with pride. Just with acceptance. This is my life now. Simple. Earned. Mine. I still sew most days. Not because I have to, but because I love to. I teach classes. I drink tea. I sit with women who thought their time was over and watch as their hands remember things their hearts had never forgotten. I watch them laugh again. I watch them take up space again. Sometimes, I go back and read the first journal I ever kept when the business began. It's filled with tiny notes about thread colors, order numbers, grocery lists scribbled in the margins. But in between the practical pages, I find small lines I wrote to myself. He doesn't see you. You are allowed to take up space. Your hands are capable of building a whole world. I don't write those things anymore. Not because they're not true, but because I no longer need to remind myself. I know who I am. Linda, 64. Entrepreneur. Artist. Woman who walked away, not to run from a man, but to return to herself. There's a photo on the wall near the register. It's not me. It's a customer. Marcia. The one who said I made her want to paint again. She brought me one of her paintings last fall. It was soft and wild and full of color. I framed it and hung it right where everyone could see. Underneath, I placed a small plaque with her words. You reminded me I'm still here. Every time I look at that wall, I feel something stir. A memory. A fire. A kind of knowing that's hard to explain. Maybe this shop was never meant to be a business. Maybe it was meant to be a mirror. A place where women come to remember they're not too old. Not too late. Not too lost. They're just still threaded. One evening, after closing up, I took a walk through the quiet streets of town. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the brick sidewalks. A woman across the street waved. I didn't know her name, but she smiled like she did know mine. Not because I was famous, because something about me made her feel seen. That's the kind of legacy I want. Not numbers, not awards, but impact. The invisible kind. The kind that reminds someone they can begin again. Even now, after everything, I still get letters. Some from women just starting their own journeys. Others from women who have been quietly strong for decades, now realizing they no longer need to be quiet. Some letters come from daughters. They say, I showed your story to my mom. She cried. Then she picked up a paintbrush. Or, my grandma read your book and signed up for an online business course. That's when I know the story didn't end with me. It's just beginning with them. And maybe it's beginning with you too. So wherever you're watching this from, I want you to know something. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not too broken. Your story didn't end in the silence. It's waiting for you to speak. And if no one else ever told you this, let me be the one. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to begin again. Just like I did. Still threaded. Still standing. Still here.